Faust, since the tragic death of Renée Nicole Good at the hands of an ICE agent in Minneapolis, there has been a lot of chatter on social media trying to explain what happened. Much of it is speculation. The main video I'll be referring to is the one recorded on the ICE agent's phone, which captures the moments immediately before the fatal shooting. In this podcast, I want to focus on what we know rather than what's being claimed. Renee Good was a 37-year-old woman killed during a federal immigration enforcement action. Video, eyewitness accounts, and official statements exist, but they've been interpreted very differently depending on who's speaking. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about evidence, process, and transparency, and all those three things are often not the same. Several outlets, including CBC and CNN, have highlighted a key moment in the phone video. Just before the shooting, Renee Good is heard speaking calmly to the officer, saying, "That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you." That matters on its own, but it's also reinforced visually. In that same moment, her body language and facial expression appeared relaxed, possibly even smiling. There is no visible agitation, no confrontational posture, no sign of escalation. What she's saying and how she appears line up. That doesn't resolve what happened seconds later, but it does shape how we understand the interaction immediately beforehand. I also examined the phone video closely, frame by frame. There is a brief sequence of dark frames. Some people have suggested that this indicates editing, but when you isolate it, those frames line up with a rapid change in camera angle and lighting. The image fades out and back in smoothly. Motion continues and the audio never stops. That pattern is consistent with camera movement and exposure adjustment, not with an editorial cut or transmission. Based on that analysis, there is no evidence the video was edited at that point. CNN aired an eyewitness account that's worth taking seriously, but also carefully. The witness described Renee Good as calm, says the vehicle was moving slowly, and places the officer to the side of the car, not directly in front of it when shots were fired. Just as important is what the witness does not say. They don't claim the officer was struck. They don't describe a sudden lunge or aggressive acceleration, and they don't speculate about intent. Eyewitness testimony is never definitive on its own, but when it aligns with video and audio evidence, it becomes a meaningful supporting data point. This brings us up to the competitive narratives. Officials in the Trump administration, echoed by statements from Vice President Vance, have framed the shooting as an act of self-defense, suggesting that the officer faced an imminent threat from the vehicle. Other reporting, notably from Reuters, the BBC in Algeria, is more constrained. Those outlets constantly say it's unclear from the footage whether Renee Good attempted to run over the agent. That distinction matters. Saying this happened is not the same as saying the available evidence clearly shows this happened. At this stage, the latter isn't simply reported by what's been publicly released. There's one additional factor worth acknowledging, not as a justification, but as a possible explanation of perception. This officer was previously involved in a violent arrest in June, during which he was seriously injured in a vehicle-related incident while attempting to arrest an undocumented individual The officer broke the driver's side window, and the suspect began to drive off while the officer's hands were inside the vehicle. The officer was dragged for a distance, hospitalized, and required more than 30 stitches. Experiences like that can be deeply traumatic, and from what we know about cognitive heuristics, prior vehicle-related injuries during arrest can shape how the brain assesses risk under pressure. When a new situation shares even partial cues with a past life-threatening event, the mind can short-circuit to the worst-case scenario. That may help explain how danger was perceived at this moment. It does not determine whether lethal force was objectively warranted. That distinction matters. Explanation is not the same as justification. Now let's talk about process. This investigation is being led at the federal level. Minnesota authorities are not in charge. That's procedurally lawful, but it's not insignificant. In the George Floyd case, Minnesota led the investigation from the outset, with federal authorities later bringing in parallel civil rights charges. Here the situation is different. Federal agents are investigating federal agents. That doesn't prove misconduct, but it does raise the bar for transparency. Federal authorities could have invited Minnesota to participate, even in a limited observer role. They didn't. That choice may be defensible, but it naturally increases public scrutiny. That scrutiny is further shaped by recent leadership changes at the FBI. President Trump publicly signaled his intention to replace FBI Director Christopher Wray with Kash Patel, a close ally and vocal critic of the Bureau. Faced with that reality, Wray chose to step down before completing his 10-year term to allow for an orderly transition. That concern doesn't arise from this case alone. It reflects a recent pattern in which Trump has pursued legal action against prosecutors and investigators he viewed as adversarial, raising broader questions about pressure on institutions meant to operate independently. None of this established bias, but in a case this sensitive, questions about institutional independency and objectivity are unavoidable. In the end, credibility will rest not on assurances, but on transparency, evidence, and process. So where does that leave us? The video does not clearly show an imminent lethal threat. Her words, body language, and facial expression suggest a calm interaction moments before the shooting. The dark frames in the video are consistent with lighting and camera movement, not editing. And the federal-only investigative structure, while lawful, places a heavier burden on transparency. At this stage, the responsible position is not certainty, it's restraint. And restraint is exactly what evidence-based analysis demands. This is André Faust for The Connected Mind. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay safe.